Good evening, Bill Wadman.
Good evening, Sandy Robertson.
How are you this week?
I'm good. How far back do you have to go to find Robert's actual son?
It is an ancient clan name. It's a very old
Yeah,
Scottish name. Centuries and centuries. In fact, it ties in with what we were speaking about last time. You were saying something I remember about, Scotland has had all these many thousands of years to develop its identity
it's true.
and to kind of, I guess, steep in its culture. Whereas you, as a white American, I guess your version of what America is probably relatively young.
I mean, so many people in America define themselves as, I mean, you are a somewhat an immigrant in the sense that you're a Scottish person living in southern England, but like very few people consider themselves just Americans here. Everyone's like, I'm Italian American, I'm German American. My family came from, India. My family came from Japan. Like they don't define themselves as American first a lot of times. It's like these weird alternate things of where their family came from.
Yep.
Um, it's so yeah, I'm, British, Ukrainian, Italian, German.
Hmm.
I mean, I tend to think of myself as American, but you know,
Well, you're a white man living in America. What more is there to say?
listen, I do the best I can.
Anyway, we did speak last time, a couple of weeks
Yes.
ago, about having a homework. And when we spoke last time, we talked about The Skating Minister
Yep.
by Sir Henry Raeburn. And I said how kind of complacent I'd become about art. And our homework was to find something again, like to
Yep.
rediscover something that we perhaps had become complacent about from our history. And you said that actually that was quite challenging for you to think about something that you'd grown so used to that you'd kind of blanked out somehow.
It is. Yeah. Well, I think it's mostly just because I wasn't consciously aware of art until at least I was in high school. I didn't really think about things like that when I was younger. I just didn't see stuff that way, which is interesting because I was at a museum last week with a friend of mine. And we went to go see a de Kooning exhibit that's at the uh, Princeton Art Museum right now. And they had some on loan from MoMA and some other places.
Mm.
And she walked in and she gasped and she said, Valentine. And I was like, what are you talking about? She goes, I haven't seen it since I was a kid. I said, what? She goes, that used to be up in our house, in our apartment when I was a kid. Like
Mm.
that actual painting. Her parents had money and had the painting and donated it to MoMA. And she hadn't seen it since she was a kid. And it was up on the wall. And we went over to it and I said, do you remember looking at little tiny blotches of paint on this? And like seeing them differently than we would looking at it now? She's like, absolutely. And so I think there's these things that you looked at a lot when you were a kid that you almost are blind to because they're just around you all the time. So that's the direction I ended up going.
Mm. I mean, we're going to come to the piece of work that you've painted after we visited mine, mainly because I
Yep.
think I talked about mine before actually. So although I have become complacent about this piece of work, I just want to give a bit of context about why I chose it. So my grandparents were very good with me when I was little. They spent most of their time looking after me. My parents, who are both also lovely, were apart when I was very young, and my mum went back to study and then to work, and so they took care of me, and they lived in the adjacent apartment as well to my mother and I. So
I got
um,
great smiles.
I was very close to them. I picked two pictures because one is from the kind of heyday at the bottom of my childhood, but actually their lives were very glamorous before I came along, and I suspect before my mum and my aunt came along. They were high flyers and movers and shakers, very well connected and very hardworking, very smart people who built themselves up. The good fortune that I have in my family is, because of these people. Um, but I wanted to show them in what they would think of as their heyday, as a kind of contrast to how I really remember them, and how I remember them from the time that I probably started to become most conscious of art myself.
Hmm.
So they were both really cultured. They came from poor backgrounds, but they were educated because they educated themselves. They had an awareness of literature. Particularly my grandfather was very well read, very academic. And I went with them a lot of places, not fancy places all over the world or anything, but just, around Scotland. And they wanted me to be curious, I think is the right way to put this. And anyway, in Glasgow, there is a fantastic art gallery and museum called Kelvingrove. And as a child, I would go there with my grandparents, sometimes with my mum, sometimes with my dad, sometimes with friends. But often I really do remember particularly going with my grandfather. And it was a real sort of, it wasn't a treat because it was quite usual to do it, but it was a very large building. And you would spend a lot of time in just one part for like a morning out with granddad or something. And the thing I wanted to talk about, the piece of work that
Classic.
hung in, or hangs now in that gallery, even though it had a bit of a break, it went somewhere else for a while, was this painting. And originally, when I was little, this painting by Salvador Dali was at the end of a corridor. Now, in this great kind of building with these wonderful marbled floors, and particularly the kind of checkered floors that create an enhanced illusion of perspective. When you walk along the corridor towards a painting like this, and the floor and the grandeur of the building and everything kind of points you in this direction, as a child, it really is like awe-inspiring.
Sure.
And I think that is the way I felt about it growing up. And then when I became a teenager, I became a bit of an arsehole, really, about lots of things like this. And my grandfather died when I was 14, but I remember already the change was happening. I didn't find things like this cool to do anymore, and I didn't really care to see it that much anymore. And it just became something that if you happened to be in the art gallery and museum on a wet, windy morning or something, because it was also somewhere that you could just like go and be for free, I suppose I just stopped noticing it. As a painting, it's considered to be one of the like finer paintings of Dali's mature career. Some people think it's ghastly. It's gauche. There's something kind of twee about it.
Because of the religious nature, they find it like somewhat sacrilegious in some way.
Maybe, but I think it's always courted controversy. Dali himself, as we know, courted controversy for the whole of his career, really.
Sure.
And just in case, I can't think that this would be true, but in case anyone doesn't know who Salvador Dali is, he's the famous Spanish surrealist painter, famed for painting, melting clocks and hands holding eggs that become thinkers, and kind of switchblade images of things that are what they are not. And
That weird experimental film where they cut the lady's eye.
yes, but then there's this. This is a very large painting. It's very commanding. That expanse of black is arresting and throws everything else onto the body of Christ, really, that then looms above the world. But in terms of being with you for this rediscovery, I've been going back into this painting, and I've mentioned already it lived at Kelvingrove since 1952, when it was acquired by the director of Glasgow Galleries, who, by the way, became a lifelong friend of Dali.
Huh.
They corresponded long after this painting had been purchased. Tom Honeyman bought the painting for £8,200 in 1951, which was a huge sum of money. And he fell out with a lot of his fellow Glaswegians because a lot of Glasgow people thought that the money that he spent on this one painting should have gone to buying lots of art by Scottish painters to put in our
Sure.
Glasgow gallery. Anyway, so it lived at Kelvingrove and in the same position at the end of the corridor until I think 1993 or 1996, and it got moved to what then was the new gallery of St Mungo's Gallery or Museum of Religious Life. And it was there until about 2006. And now it's back at Kelvingrove. And I've seen it a couple of times since, and it's moved position, so it's almost in its own little room. To me, it seems wasted because it's in a compressed space that doesn't give it the same introduction. You know, it's like having a support act. That corridor was like its support act.
Sure.
And now it's just like in this small space. But some people possibly prefer it because it might feel more intimate, maybe, to be with Christ in that way. I don't know. But for me, I became really accustomed to like the anticipation of approaching it, or in approaching it. There was this anticipation. The heart would start beating faster, as if something might happen.
Like it actually had some magic, religious or not, to it.
It does, and people will hate this, people will love this. But nonetheless, whatever you think of it, it's not a painting to be ignored.
Yeah.
It does have presence. Of course, that's subjective too, but I would challenge anybody to say that they didn't feel something about this painting.
Can you, when you go see it now, can you see it the way you saw it as a kid? Kind of switch between seeing it as you saw it as a kid and seeing it as you see it as a, adult woman who has a lot of education in art?
Well, this is why, again, there's this lovely element of rediscovery, because I'm also then spending time, if I go to Kelvingrove and I go and see it, it is like a portal into the past, because, this painting has now adopted the life of my childhood.
Hmm.
And, stories spring up around the painting. I've told so many people about the corridor and the anticipation. And I've told so many people about going to the gallery with Grandad and, all those things. That's become part of like a mythology. But the rediscovery part is because in childhood, I'm struck by, let's say, the magnificence or the feeling of awe inspired by the painting. But I didn't really know anything about the painting. And, a bit later, maybe when I got to about 9 or 10, I would know who Dali was. And I had a book on Dali, I remember. It was, fascinating to me and weird and the kind of thing you love when you're 9 or 10. What I didn't know until this rediscovery prompted by our conversation last time was that the body of Christ was modelled on Russell Saunders, who was a stuntman in Hollywood that Dali had employed. He was an acrobat. He could hang, and be positioned and move his body in a way that was lithe and strong enough to stay for a while, or long enough that Dali could sketch and plan and prep his painting around.
Can you flip between the two just for a second? I just want to look at him and then go look at the painting for a second. Okay, yeah, okay, you can go back. Yeah, you can almost see it, right?
Yeah, I mean, he taught at Muscle Beach. He trained at Muscle Beach. He was,
Sure.
very well known in Hollywood, but I didn't know anything about him. And the other thing I really didn't know anything about, shame on me, because this is very relevant, is the other thing that's on the screen now, which is that Dali didn't just come up with this painting from nothing, just from his kind of latent Catholicism, from Spanish culture. He had a kind of vision himself. But this was after he had visited a monastery where he encountered the original St. John of the Cross's drawing of the crucifixion. And St. John of the Cross was a mystic, a monk who was, celebrated for his visions. And he had had a vision of Christ as if from above and looking down into the world, carrying the weight of human suffering upon him. And then later, in 1948, I think, Dali had an experience where a voice told him, Dali, you must paint this Christ, meaning this. So Dali had been really moved by the experience of seeing this original little sketch. And from this outcome of kind of Christian mysticism comes Dali's painting, separated by 500, well, 400 years, 400
Yeah.
years. So I didn't know about any of that. And this is, I think, what I was sort of hoping for when we talked last time and said about how interesting it would be to like start afresh with things. And
Sure.
I now know that there's all kinds of things connected just to this one painting that I may or may not like, but
Sure.
that is nonetheless rooted into my childhood. Um, it's a whole world of stuff kind of spills out of it. I didn't
It's
know.
also a really interesting painting. I mean, the geometry of it, the perspective, it's very modern looking too, because it's kind of creepy looking from above like that. Um, it's that painting makes me uncomfortable, and I'm a religious person, so it's just like it's not like I'm offended by it or anything like that. There's just something about the perspective. It almost makes me feel like I have a little vertigo going on.
Yeah, it's has that capacity. But the other thing I wanted to say, I'm not sure if that picture is from 1952, but it's from thereabouts, maybe 1955.
Okay.
Um,
So I think your grandparents were there doing that at the same time Dali was painting.
well, it's just more that the two of them would have been probably at some kind of social engagement when that painting was
Yep.
unveiled. They're the kinds of people that perhaps would have been invited, and I don't know that for sure, and they're not there to
Yeah.
ask anymore. But I'm just thinking about them and about them at that age, and with their experiences of being, lovers from the war and, all the things that had made them who they were, what they would have thought. And that is my great regret, actually, is that I might have all my built up, stuff about this painting. But what I don't know and I can't know is what they thought about it.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't think about it that much at all.
Maybe not, but what I think is suggests to me that they did think something about it is that they took me again and again.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, so that's my little rediscovery.
Sure. Yeah. So this is this painting by a guy named William Baldwin was up in our living room when I was growing up. And growing up in New England, it's funny because I do not like pastoral paintings from the past, like European, like that feel of like, cows in a field and all that kind of thing. Those always made me uncomfortable. And this actually kind of also makes me uncomfortable. But this is very much sort of an idealized version, although this is probably an actual house back then up in Maine where this guy lived. When I look at it, I think of it as a weird idealized version of where I grew up in New England and what, even though I did not grow up on a piece of land like this in an old colonial house like that, probably 19th century house. I grew up in a house that was built in 1978 on an acre and a half of land that was next to other acre and a half plots of land. But there was something about the way that this painting looks with the woods in the background and everything. It makes me feel the way I used to feel about where I grew up. Does that, I'm using a lot of words because it's hard to describe what I'm talking about.
Do you
But
think that someone else's nostalgia is um catching? So I don't have the same references as you, for example,
sure.
but I can feel nostalgic about this image. Now, in part because You've told me a
I
little.
think it's also meant to inhabit that, right? To some extent. There's no, obviously this is 1972, but there's no car in the photograph. You know,
But there is
there's
a
no,
carport.
well, yes, or a barn or whatever it is, right? Like, or a shed. You know what I mean? Like, it's somewhat ambiguous. This could be 1910 and it could be 1972, and it would be the same picture.
See, I
You
found
know?
it very strange. Having not seen this image before you've introduced it, I actually was thinking to myself, this is like really kind of American timeless. And
Yep.
then I just noticed that single spindle of white where I think the carport is, and it crushed it for me. It made it seem somehow then I was almost like disappointed.
Wait, where's the spin? Where are you talking? I'm trying to understand where you're saying.
So
You're saying the building all the way on the right?
where the snow is on the roof,
Okay, yeah.
down there, there's like a white line that's like the edge of the carport.
Oh, I see. On the right edge.
And that to me said to me that it was from a more recent
Yeah,
period. And for some reason, I found that very disappointing because
yeah,
I had felt that it belonged to a wider
yeah.
historical narrative.
Well, I mean, to some extent, it does, right? You know, what I mean, like, what I find interesting about this is that I knew nothing about this guy, and I did some searching, and I found very little about this guy, except that I found a Facebook post that somebody had put up the other day.
Hmm.
Not the other day. This was like weeks ago, or a couple of years ago, rather. And it said Belfast Museum. This is a place up in Maine. Is assisting someone looking for information about a Swanville artist, William E. Baldwin, contemporary artist, painting of ships and woodland scenes. His work was part of the MBNA collection. He's been a contemporary painter, and his work has been sold at Maine auction houses. Anybody know anything? Thanks. And somebody replies and says, Megan, Bill Baldwin, who lived in Appleton, passed away in the past 10 years or so. So, like, I don't even know when he was born or how old he was, but he passed away in the last 10 years. He painted a ship that belonged to the Pinnacle family years ago. I forgot exactly when. My brother is friends with his daughter, so I could find out a bit more about him possibly. At one time, he worked with Norman Rockwell, I recall.
Mm.
So, like, this guy had some life up in New England, right? Maybe he trained with Rockwell or knew him personally when he was a younger man or whatever. And he painted this painting that does, as far as I know, there's no obituary that I could find. This guy, there's no title that I know on the back of the painting. My mother has this at her house in her attic, right? But this painting that this guy made had such an effect on me that when I see it, it makes me feel a very specific way that it wouldn't make anybody else feel. It's only because I saw it so much as a kid, right?
Mm.
The picture of me with the cat there, the painting is on the wall, I think right above my head in that picture. Um,
So you get
but
transported back to this.
yes,
Mm.
yeah, very much so. But also sort of it was there was this sense when I look at paintings like that, and members of my family had similar sort of New England pastoral paintings like that. That it's almost like it was a feeling that they were trying to sell people about New England. You know, I'm sure that there are similar things of, you know, romantic paintings of people up on hills in Scotland, you know what I mean? Where, you know, there's similar sort of like trying to sell what Scotland once was or what they think it once was. And I think there's a sense of that in this too.
I just think with that though that it's as if everything has been bleached and cleaned.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't find that with Scottish painting.
Well, I think it's because I think because Scotland is much more uh, weather worn. I mean, obviously we have snow and stuff in New England, but people don't paint the storms. They paint the aftermath of the storm,
Hmm.
you know?
What does that say about us culturally, though? I mean, this is all very well, you know, we're being very
Yeah,
descriptive,
sure.
and it's
I,
good
I,
that we are. But what I'm wondering is, like, I want to know what
I
is.
mean, where I grew up is very sort of puritanical. It's very sort of the people that left England and came here for religious reasons and stuff. Like there's a very conservative, small c conservative sense of the whole thing. Very pull you up by your own bootstraps. You have a farm out in the things, and you deal with the weather as it comes, and you survive the winter to farm in the summer, and like all that sort of sense is
Mm.
all spun up in there. Um, I don't know that it actually exists. Man, I got a goofy face on me at the bottom picture, don't I? Um,
You've always
Sitting
got a
next to my
goofy face
sister.
on you,
So
Bill.
it turns out I asked my mother, and it turns out my grandparents, that's Carl and Lily, and those are my mother's parents, bought this on a trip up through Maine. So they could have bought it from him. He could have had like a barn open on the side of the road with his paintings there, right? And they could have bought it and brought it back. It's just, but I will never know. Those people are all dead, right? So we don't know the actual story. And as far as I can find, unless I'm sure if I did some real digging, um, that I maybe could get a hold of his daughter and ask questions. You know what I mean? Like,
But isn't this the beauty of what we're doing now? Is that, you know, the fact that you have found somebody somewhere who might know his daughter, or,
yep,
you know, been through this process of trying to dig for information. I mean, information's one thing because it kind of, you know, it's information is useful, but it's dead. The thing that's more interesting to me is that both of us have taken this up, and
yeah,
it's animated something from the past. It's
yeah.
animated it in a way that I find really interesting. So, you know, I sort of wish that I could become excited again about things more. You know, I think certainly I feel like I'm going to a period of my life where there's a sort of flat line of just like acceptance of things almost. And it's not that I want to disrupt myself or unsettle myself, but I kind of miss the feeling of excitement about discovery of things. And
Do you think
and
it's just getting older, or do you think it's just, what do you think it is?
maybe getting older, maybe just being, I don't know, overwhelmed with
Wiser?
life. But even something like finding out about Russell
Maybe
Saunders.
you think Russell Saunders is super hot. That maybe that's what it is.
Um, I think he was a bit of a gay icon actually.
I'd imagine he would be. Yes, it looks like he
Um,
is.
but you know, there is something so delicious in a way about childhood. If you've been fortunate enough to have a childhood that's not completely marred with tragedy and trauma, um, it's an interesting exercise to go back in and fetch forward the excitement and the warmth of it if you can. But my next challenge, I suppose, is to become invigorated about something new. That it's almost like the future classic in the way that I didn't know when I was little that this would be the thing that I grew complacent about and then would
Yeah.
rediscover. You didn't think when this was hanging on your wall that it would ever be so meaningful to you, perhaps.
What is the quote, the lyric from the Muppet song? Uh, There's not a word yet for good friends you've just met.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
a
it's like
perfect
they're,
quote.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
Bill, thank you for joining me and doing your homework, even though I had to push you about a
I've
bit.
been thinking about it. It's just, it's very hard for me. I mean, just for the reasons we said. You know, it was also interesting is you and I both chose paintings by artists from like the middle of the 20th century. We didn't choose something from the 16th century. We didn't choose something from 1985.
But isn't that, I suppose, you know, you and I are at the kind of Gen X end of
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
And I think our references, much as we try to, you know, bludgeon forth into the 90s, really, you know, our references come from actually the
70s
post-war
and 60s
years.
and 50s. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And especially, I have to say for me, because my grandparents were so present in my life, and their references were all from the 1940s and 50s.
Sure.
I think the things that I find closest to me in my childhood are are from that period. And the other thing I would say about that, and I don't know if this resonates with you as well, is that all my life, much as any of us are different to each other, I have appreciated the unusual aspects of me that have come from being brought up in a family home, which was, I mean, my mum and my grandparents. It was almost like I. It's not that my mum wasn't there. Of course she was, but the the parental references for me were from the generation before my mum. So it
Hmm.
was as if I sort of missed out the more modern
Sure.
part of being brought up in the 1980s and 90s. I
Yeah.
kind of came straight out of the 1950s.
Sure. I mean,
And
I still listen to the Beatles and Barry Manilow, so what do I know? It's I get it.
I think you do get it because I can hear similar things in
It's
you.
also interesting to me, though, the perceptions that we had of those time periods we did not exist in might not actually be what it felt like to be there, but they describe very strongly, at least how we perceive those times, you know?
Sure, but you have had the good fortune to spend time with your family, and I'm assuming talk to them. And yes, get their version of history and told through their own experience and so on. But we do have a sense, I think. The legacy of those times lives in us.
Yeah.
I do think that I live now with my grandparents in me. They are in me, and I am of them.
Sure.
And I sort of feel like, much as I don't have their memories, there is something that comes forward. Anyway, that's a different
I
discussion.
also like I
Together.
also like the composition of this painting. Like I like that the house is sitting down in the right-hand corner. I like the negative space of the sky. There's something about it that I would crop an image this way as an adult. So who
It's
knows
very
how much of an
photographic.
impact it had on me. Yeah, it's very photorealistic kind of style, right?
Mm. And the Rockwell reference is absolutely, for me,
Yeah.
clear, as is
Yep.
Hopper. I mean, this is very Hopper-esque, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, Bill, thank
Just
you.
thank you.
Should I set another homework, or is that you done
Yeah,
for the year?
what I got homework. I got more homework?
More
Sure.
homework.
Whatever you like. What do you got?
Okay, so I think now we should look for something completely new to us
Okay.
and bring it to each other next time.
It's going to be tricky. By the way, the a big giant Raphael show is opening at the Met this week with an altarpiece that the Met owned part of, the uh, Gardner Museum in Boston owned part of, the London, oh, I forget which museum in London owned, the National Gallery, I think, owned part of, and they're bringing it together for the first time since 1660.
Wow,
Isn't that pretty cool?
that's very cool.
So I got to go see it. But I will find something and we will discuss.
Okay,
All
bye,
right.
Bill.
Bye.